Imagine knowing the exact date, time, and location of your death. Imagine looking down from a prison grate and seeing the hole in the ground where your body will be thrown. In October 2015, in northern Iraq, American intelligence captured an image that chilled the blood of analysts at the Pentagon. It wasn't tank movements. It wasn't missile silos. It was graves, surveillance drones, operating silently in the stratosphere. Photographed dozens of freshly dug graves just outside a prison, controlled by the Islamic State in the city of Hawija. Intelligence cross-referenced the data, and the conclusion was terrifying. Those graves weren't for soldiers killed in combat. They were for a mass execution. Inside, 70 hostages were awaiting the end. They knew they wouldn't see the next sunset. What the terrorists didn't know is that the deadliest force on the planet was already gearing up, coming to ensure those graves remained empty. But to understand the insanity of what happened, that night, you first need to understand the men sent into the slaughterhouse. This story has a protagonist, Sergeant Major Thomas Payne, and he wasn't an ordinary soldier. His story doesn't begin in Iraq, but years earlier, in a hospital bed, with a shattered body. Payne enlisted in the army right after 9/11, driven by that fierce patriotism that defined a generation. He joined the Rangers, the elite infantry, and quickly stood out. But war takes its toll. In 2010, during a mission in Afghanistan, Payne was hit by grenade shrapnel. His knee was practically destroyed. The doctors were clear. His career on the front lines was over. Recovery would be long, and just walking properly again would be a victory. Running with 80 pounds of gear? Impossible. But Payne had a different mindset. While in rehab, he didn't just focus on walking. He focused on becoming the best soldier in the world. Against all medical odds, he not only returned to active duty, but in 2012 he won the Best Ranger competition. For those who don't know, this is one of the most brutal physical and mental competitions in the global armed forces. It involves days without sleep, marches of dozens of miles, shooting tests, and survival skills. Payne won. He proved he was unbreakable. And that is exactly why, years later, he was selected for Delta Force, the United States' most secretive counterterrorism unit. He was forged in pain to be ready for the night of October 22nd. Let's go back to 2015. The situation in Iraq was critical. The Islamic State controlled vast regions and used terror as a psychological weapon. The Hawija prison was a center of horrors. Intelligence reports indicated systematic torture, filmed executions, and inhumane conditions. When the photos of the graves arrived, command knew there was no time for diplomacy. It was a hostage rescue mission. In military slang, this is called a zero-fail mission. If they messed up, 70 people would die, and videos of American soldiers being dragged through the streets would be broadcast to the whole world. The operation was put together in a rush, but with surgical precision. The task force would be composed of Delta Force operators and Kurdish commandos, the Peshmerga. The political plan was delicate. The Americans were supposed to be there only to advise and assist. The order was clear. Let the Kurds lead. Stay in the shadows. Do not engage in the firefight unless absolutely necessary. They rehearsed the raid on mock-ups and replicas, memorizing every hallway, every door, every firing angle. But, as the military saying goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. In the early hours of October 22nd, the desert darkness was broken by the deep thrum of Chinook and Black Hawk helicopter rotors from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. They flew low, skimming the dunes to avoid radar. When they approached Hawija, visibility was zero. A dust storm blanketed the landing zone. The pilots, using state-of-the-art night vision goggles, had to land practically blind. As soon as the helicopter ramps dropped, the plan began to crumble. The dust kicked up by the rotors created a brownout, disorienting one of the teams. The element of surprise, which was their only advantage, evaporated in seconds. The enemy force at the prison was on high alert. Before the soldiers even touched the ground, the shooting started. And it wasn't sporadic fire. It was a wall of lead coming from heavy machine guns and RPGs. The main Kurdish team got pinned down in the open, a kill zone with no cover. Allied soldiers began to fall, wounded and dead, screaming over the radio. Panic threatened to paralyze the entire operation. If they retreated, the hostages would die. If they advanced, they would be massacred. It was at this critical moment that hierarchy and rules of engagement were thrown in the trash. There was another veteran there. Sergeant Major Joshua Wheeler. A man with 14 combat deployments. A giant among soldiers. Wheeler saw his Kurdish allies being torn apart. He knew the order was to stay in the rear. But he also knew what it meant to be a Delta operator. He looked at his team and said just one word, which would echo forever in the unit's history. With me. Wheeler ran straight toward the sound of the guns. He intentionally exposed himself to draw enemy fire and allow the Kurds to reorganize. He advanced, firing, covering the movement of the others. An enemy. Bullet found him. Wheeler fell. He was the first American soldier to die in direct combat against ISIS, but his death was not in vain. His suicidal action broke the terrorists' momentum and allowed the assault team to reach the prison walls. One man's sacrifice bought the lives of dozens. While Wheeler fought and died outside, Thomas Payne and his team were flanking the prison from the rear. They needed to be fast. They reached the first building. With the precision of surgeons, they cleared the rooms, neutralized the guards, and freed about 30 hostages. They were terrified faces. Men who were expecting death and now saw futuristic soldiers with American and Kurdish flags. But the job was only half done. The radio crackled with bad news. The second building, where the rest of the hostages were held, was on fire. The ISIS terrorists, realizing they would lose the prison, decided that if they couldn't keep the hostages, no one would. They set the building on fire. Worse, they started detonating suicide vests inside to collapse the structure. Payne ran to the second building. The scene he found looked like something out of a horror movie. Thick black smoke poured out of the windows. The heat was so intense that meters away, skin felt like it was burning, and from inside that furnace came the screams. Human screams mixed with the sound of gunfire. The main door was reinforced steel and locked with heavy industrial padlocks. The hostages were trapped in cells inside, being cooked alive. Payne grabbed a pair of bolt cutters. He tried to cut the padlock on the entrance, but the angle was bad and the smoke blinded him. As he struggled with the metal, terrorists fired through the windows and the smoke. Bullets zipped past his head. The situation got worse. The heat began to melt the plastic of the night vision equipment attached to Payne's helmet. Hot liquid dripped onto his face. He was suffocating. He had to retreat to cough and breathe. Other soldiers tried and failed. The order came over the radio, cold and logical. The building is unstable. It's coming down. Get out of there immediately. It was the rational decision. Save your own life. Let the building burn. Payne looked at the entrance. He could hear the screams. He thought of Wheeler, who had just given his life outside. He thought of his own oath. Payne shut off his survival instinct. He took a deep breath of the little clean air left, gripped the bolt cutters, and plunged back into the black. Smoke one more time. Inside, visibility was zero. Payne moved by touch and by the sound of the screams. He found the first cell door. With superhuman effort, his arm muscles burning as much as the fire around him, he snapped the padlock. The door swung open. Dozens of hostages, coughing and crying, ran toward the light of the exit. But there was one more cell in the back, the hardest to reach. Payne was already at his physical limit. His lungs burned from the toxic smoke. The building's ceiling groaned, the wood cracking, about to give way and crush everything. He exited the building again, gasped for air, switched the cutters to his other hand, and went in for the third time. He advanced down the burning hallway, stepping over bodies of dead terrorists. He reached the last door. The padlock was thick. He pushed. The metal resisted. He pushed harder, using his body weight, ignoring the heat, ignoring the bullets. Snap, the metal gave way. He kicked the door open. "Let's go! Let's go!" he screamed. The last hostages were practically dragged out. Seconds after Payne and the last prisoner exited, parts of the ceiling collapsed behind them. Now, they had a new problem. More than 70 hostages, disoriented, in shock, in the middle of a prison complex at night. And extraction hadn't arrived yet. The firefight continued. ISIS was sending reinforcements. That was when the discipline of Delta Force was seen. Payne and his teammates, along with the Kurds, formed a human wall. They didn't run for the helicopters. They stood still, standing shoulder to shoulder, creating a protective corridor. They used their own armored bodies as shields so the hostages could run safely to the aircraft. The Chinook helicopters landed. Maximum capacity was ignored. They stacked people inside. There were so many people that the rear ramp wouldn't close. The Delta operators flew sitting on the edge of the ramp, legs dangling in the air, flying over the Iraqi desert as the sun began to rise on the horizon. When the dust settled the next morning, the world learned what had happened in Hawija. Images of the empty graves circulated in intelligence reports. That hole in the ground, destined for 70 souls, remained empty. The cost was high. Joshua Wheeler's body returned home draped in the American flag. He left behind a wife and 4 sons, including a newborn baby. He died in a foreign land, saving people he had never seen before. Thomas Payne survived. Years later, in a ceremony at the White House, he received the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration a soldier can receive. The president told his story about the bolt cutters, about the fire, about the reconstructed knee that didn't fail. But when Payne took the podium, with the medal around his neck, his look wasn't one of triumph. It was one of respect. He dedicated every piece of that medal to Joshua Wheeler. The Hawija mission is remembered today not just for the tactics or the violence, but for pure human will. It is proof that even when death has a set date and the graves are already dug, there are men willing to descend into hell to change destiny, and that is why the name of Thomas Payne and the sacrifice of Joshua Wheeler will never be forgotten. Thanks for watching. If you want more true stories about the dark side of military operations, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. See you on the next mission.